Stanford might never get back to being, what Stanford once was, which was a perennial conference contender. Their continued commitment to academics, which is a huge boon to the university, we can all agree, will continue to be a hindrance to the football program because they cannot bring in transfers like everyone else. But kids can leave Stanford just like they can elsewhere. You look at a guy like E.J. Smith, for instance. He's off to Texas A&M. That's not the only guy who has left Stanford in the last couple of years. But Stanford has a case to be one of the bottom teams in the ACC that surprises people a little bit. So their win total on FanDuel is sitting at 3.5. That's very low. That's very, very low. It's actually the lowest in the ACC. Now, Wake Forest has got a win total of 4.5. Virginia has got a win total of 4.5 as well. When you think about conferences and the teams that have got the lowest sportsbook win totals going into a year, do you feel like there's always at least one that surprises people? And there's also usually one big favorite that vastly underperforms. A couple examples out of the conference that Stanford used to play in, the Pac-12, RIP. This past year, USC's win total was 9.5. They ended the year 7-5. Arizona's win total was 4.5. They ended the year 9-3. I don't project that sort of growth, of success for Stanford as they go into their first year as a member of the ACC. But I think that the Cardinal can benefit from a couple things here that would allow them to go over that win total and maybe even push to be a bowl team. 3 things, as a matter of fact. Number 1, everydayers out there know that I'm a huge fan of places that return a quarterback and coach/offensive coordinator. Well, Stanford may very well have that, unless Elijah Brown, who came from Mater Dei, by the way, more on him in a moment, unless he pushes out Ashton Daniels, he'll be the starter. And Daniels had his moments last year, did some nice things, wasn't amazing, certainly wasn't flawless, could improve, but won a couple of games. Look, I didn't think Stanford was going to win more than 2 games. They lost to an FCS team last year and still managed to go 3-9. They won at Colorado and at Washington State. They should not have won either of those games, but they did. That was the 28-29 comeback in Boulder by Stanford. Alec Aomanor, who is back with the Cardinal this year on the outside, was just cooking Travis Hunter. That was one of the craziest football games I have ever seen. Yeah, Stanford was the winning team in that game. So when you go into a conference where the geography is so twisted and backwards, you're going to have teams that don't know what it feels like to go all the way across the country. Let me give you a list of teams that are going to play at the Farm this year. First of all, in the non-conference, TCU. Here's what I'll say to the Horned Frogs out there. You better not lose that football game. Sonny Dykes, you bring in Andy Avalos as defensive coordinator. This should be a bounce-back year for TCU. Sneaky contender in the Big 12. Better not lose that game at the Farm. That's an August 30th game, by the way. That's a Friday, the day before week 1 really kicks off. Virginia Tech is going to go to Stanford. SMU will go to Stanford. Wake Forest will go to Stanford. And Louisville will go to Stanford. And if you're looking for value just on the win total, I think Stanford over 3.5, pretty solid. I don't expect them to lose to Cal Poly, which is not as good of an FCS as Sacramento State, which is where Troy Taylor actually came from, by the way. They play San Jose State at the end of the year, who have hired a new coach, the former head coach at Navy after Brent Brennan went to be the head coach at Arizona. I don't expect Stanford to lose that game either. So you would need them to win 2 games the rest of the year. I think it's very doable. I think it is very, very doable. Now, this is not an easy ACC schedule, but there's no Miami on here. There's no Florida State on here. Those are a couple of breaks. You got to go at NC State. You got to host Virginia Tech. You play Notre Dame as always. But again, it's manageable. It's doable. It's workable. So that's the first thing, is that can just throw a lot of variables into the equation that not a lot of people maybe expect, even the players and coaches themselves. You don't always have a great environment out at Stanford. That could cause you to play down to the level of your competition. It's happened several times before. And number 2, it's a long way to travel. You're going from Wake Forest or Virginia Tech to Stanford? It's a long trip. It's a long, long trip. They talk in the NFL a lot in the gambling world about teams that are making long trips all the way across the country. So that's the first thing. Here's the second thing. Troy Taylor is a really good football coach. His track record at Sacramento State, do you know what his record was? 30-8. Yeah, the Hornets were a regular playoff team. He built them into an FCS brand that is having a lot of success, that beat Stanford a year ago. I'm sure that felt really good to the Hornets fans and players who didn't want to see Troy Taylor move on. Maybe understood that he did, but still, it probably felt really good to go into Palo Alto and win that football game. But Troy Taylor is a good football coach. He is a good football coach. Now, winning at Stanford nowadays is pretty difficult. If David Shaw can fail to succeed, anybody could fail to succeed out there. But Troy Taylor won those games last year with coaching. He didn't win it with some outstanding roster or some fluky play. No, he just outcoached whoever was on the other side. He outcoached Deion Sanders. He outcoached Jake Dickert at Washington State, who was a good coach, who is a good coach, I should say. He just went outcoached him. That's just what it came down to. Most of the time in one possession games, that's what it comes down to. Arizona nearly fell victim to the farm curse. The farm curse, what I was just talking about, where you don't have much of an environment, you don't get up for the game, you play down to the level of your competition. Arizona, who went 10-3 until Jed Fish left, was a trendy pick for the college football playoff in 2024. They would have been one of the favorites in the Big 12, in my view, if Fish had stuck around. He decided to go to Washington instead. They beat Stanford on the road 21-20. They've got way more talent. Way more talent. Colorado last year had more talent. Washington State last year had more talent. Stanford went 2-1 in those games. 2-1. Now, they had some blowouts, to be sure. Their roster's not going to be one of the better ones in the ACC. You can't flip it around in a year. But Troy Taylor is a good football coach. Guy knows what he is doing. And I just wonder if in year two, he doesn't have a little bit. You've got Ashton Daniels potentially coming back to start and having a little bit of continuity there on the offensive side of the ball. You've got Alec Ayomanor as a bona fide number one wide receiver. Look, I've seen worse offensive situations. Now, they've got to get better on the defensive side of the ball. They brought in a corner from Washington via the portal. That's not an easy thing to accomplish with the Cardinal. They have just 2 transfers coming in this cycle. They brought in a top 30 high school recruiting class, though. Did you know that? Did you know that? Do you know who their headline recruit was? A guy who could push Ashton Daniels for the starting job. So Kevin Borba of Locked On Buffs has written about this when he does some coverage of the Cardinal as well and does a fantastic job. Ashton Daniels is the favorite to be the starter, but this is a quarterback battle. This is a quarterback battle for the Cardinal because you bring in a guy who was at Mater Dei with a 42-2 record. Just think about that. Think about the players who have come out of Mater Dei before. Bryce Young most recently comes to mind. I believe Matt Barkley was a Mater Dei high school product. A lot of really good football players come out of there. Stanford has got Elijah Brown. He was one of the most highly sought after quarterbacks in the 2024 cycle. He's going to play for the Cardinal. And this is the third point. The quarterback position should be improved from a year ago. Either Daniels with another year under his belt, or a year starting under his belt, either he takes a step forward or Elijah Brown comes in, and if he beats out someone who was a serviceable starter last year, you know that Elijah Brown could very well be the real deal. And when you're working with an offensive mind like Troy Taylor, I think the Cardinal could do something this year. That something might not be making a bowl game, but it could be winning more games than anybody expects. I think any team, TCU, Cal Poly, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, and Louisville, along with SMU, any one of those teams has got to be careful going out to Stanford. I have seen it so many times over the years. Crazy stuff happens on the farm. And Troy Taylor showed last year that on a given Saturday, he can do more with less overall talent than the coach on the other side. And if he's got a little bit more talent, and if he starts to build this thing up over the next couple of years, it can certainly improve. And I think it will improve because Taylor's a good coach. But as it pertains to this year, you look at Stanford, see a low win total, and you expect, they're going to be a bottom feeder this year. I don't know. Quarterback, schedule with the home games, and a good head coach. Just just keep an eye on Stanford for me. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.